The title of Duke of Rothesay and the other Scottish titles which I've had the honour to carry for so long, I now pass to Catherine.
Behind a locked door at Buckingham Palace, King Charles placed his signature beneath a paragraph that could transform the monarchy forever. The secret document did not merely praise Catherine's future importance, it formally identified her as the woman who would ultimately carry the crown forward beside William, and ordered Camilla's removal from the monarchy's long-term governing structure. When Charles finally lowered the pen, no one in the room celebrated. They understood that one royal future had just been secured by ending another. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles kept his hand beside the pen as silence settled over the room. His private secretary watched. The constitutional advisor waited. The king had signed the Crown Continuity Instrument, a confidential framework defining how authority, household control, ceremonial influence and public leadership would pass into the next reign. It was not an abdication decree, meaning he had not surrendered the throne or placed William and Catherine in immediate command. Yet its effect was enormous. It confirmed Catherine as the future queen beside the prince and removed Camilla from future succession planning, strategic royal councils and long-term crown representation. The monarch read Camilla's name again and pressed his thumb against the paper. "Is there no other way?" he asked. Though he knew the answer, the advisor explained that any delay would leave the monarchy divided between two centres of influence. William needed certainty, Catherine needed freedom to prepare. Camilla, however, would lose the future position she believed years of loyalty had earned. Charles tightened his jaw because the decision protected his son and daughter-in-law while wounding the woman who had stood beside him through rejection and eventual acceptance. A sealed annex made the decree even more powerful. An annex is an additional section attached to an official document containing details withheld from the main text. This one granted Catherine oversight of strategy, charities, youth engagement and ceremonial reform. She would help decide how the next reign spoke, served and connected with the public. A second clause blocked Camilla's relatives and advisors from retaining influence after Charles's reign, dismantling a network expected to survive the transition. Minutes later, a palace aide lifted two sealed envelopes and left through the corridors. One moved toward William and Catherine, carrying duty and crushing responsibility. The other moved toward Camilla, carrying proof that her future place had been closed by the man she trusted most. But before either woman could understand what Charles had done, the document forced the palace to confront the personal loyalties, old wounds and competing visions hidden behind their carefully controlled public faces. For Catherine, the sealed envelope represented a future she had spent years preparing to serve, but had never dared to claim. For Camilla, it represented something far more brutal. The possibility that history was preparing to move past her while she was still standing inside the palace. Two women, separated by generation, reputation and royal purpose, were suddenly bound to the same document. One was being elevated toward the crown. The other was being removed from its future. Catherine opened the envelope beside William at Adelaide Cottage, but the first page left her completely still. Her influence had grown through discipline, restraint, family stability, and years of public trust. She had never treated queenship as a prize waiting to be won. She saw it as a duty that would demand sacrifice from her marriage, her children, and every private part of her life. That was why the words naming her as the monarchy's future central female figure brought no smile. The Crown Continuity Instrument, the confidential document setting out how royal authority would pass into the next reign, placed enormous power in her hands while closing the door on Camilla's future influence. William watched her read the sentence twice before she placed the pages on the table. Catherine moved away from him and whispered, "Someone is about to be deeply hurt." The prince followed, choosing his words carefully. He told her the document was not a reward. It was protection for the institution, for their children, and for a future reign that could not survive divided loyalties. She turned back to him, visibly shaken, and answered that protection could still feel cruel when it was built on another person's loss. He understood the weight behind her words because her success had arrived beside another woman's suffering. The future king then admitted something he had kept from her. Charles had consulted him privately weeks earlier through a recorded palace conversation preserved for the succession files. William had not written the decree, but he had warned his father that the next reign could not operate beneath two competing centres of female authority. Catherine stared at him, realising that the decision had been forming long before the envelope reached their home. He insisted he had argued for clarity, not humiliation. Yet the difference suddenly felt painfully thin. Camilla received her copy at Clarence House and read it alone. After decades of controversy, rejection, and gradual acceptance, she believed her place beside Charles had finally become secure. The document threatened more than her influence. It threatened the meaning she had attached to every difficult year she had endured. When she reached the removal clause, she pushed her chair back so sharply that it struck the wall. Her private secretary entered at once, but the Queen Consort folded the pages and ordered him to leave without explanation. Camilla opened the document again after the door closed. Beside the sealed annex, she found a handwritten notation, necessary after Windsor. Her expression changed instantly. She knew that those words referred to a private moment the palace had deliberately buried, and she understood that the decree had not appeared from nowhere. The words after Windsor pointed back to the private confrontation that turned years of restrained rivalry into a constitutional crisis Charles could no longer ignore. The document had not appeared without warning. Its true origin lay inside Windsor Castle during a ceremony that was supposed to demonstrate royal unity. Behind closed doors, a disagreement over Catherine's future role became something far more dangerous, a direct challenge to William's authority and Charles's succession plans. One sentence, spoken when no cameras were present, changed the atmosphere completely. Those who heard it would later describe the moment as the instant Charles realised affection could no longer be allowed to overrule the crown. Tension had been building for months. Camilla expected her household, trusted advisors, and ceremonial preferences to remain influential after William eventually inherited the throne. The prince wanted something very different, a smaller monarchy with clearer authority, fewer competing voices, and firm control centred around his immediate family. That transition, meaning the planned transfer of responsibilities from one royal reign to the next, mattered because uncertainty could split staff loyalties and weaken public confidence before the future king had even taken command. Catherine had also begun attending high-level discussions about public trust, youth engagement, patronage reform, and royal communications. Her growing role was not ceremonial decoration. Charles increasingly relied on her ability to connect with younger families and steady the institution during difficult periods. Camilla saw that access differently. She feared the palace was quietly building a parallel court around the Wales family, a separate centre of advisors and influence capable of overshadowing her, while she still stood beside the king. Everything broke during the Windsor Commonwealth reception planning meeting. The gathering had been called to organise a major event involving representatives from Commonwealth nations, the voluntary association of countries linked through shared history and cooperation. Catherine was expected to chair the Future Strategy Committee, but the Queen Consort objected. With Charles and William listening, she delivered the sentence that changed everything. "There cannot be two queens directing this family while I'm still here." Catherine did not argue. She closed her briefing folder, looked directly at the monarch, and asked whether her presence had become an obstacle. Charles hesitated. His silence lasted only seconds, but it struck harder than an answer. She remained composed, yet the hurt was unmistakable because the role she had accepted as a duty was suddenly being treated like an act of ambition. William pushed his chair back and told Camilla that Catherine's future authority was not hers to restrict. The king raised one hand and ordered calm, but the prince refused to sit until his wife's place was acknowledged. Catherine repeated that she wanted no conflict, yet William insisted the problem had already moved beyond personal feelings. After Catherine left, Camilla urged Charles to delay transferring strategic duties to the Wales household. She warned during the documented meeting that William was moving too quickly and that his wife's popularity might overshadow the sovereign before the reign was complete. The monarch said little, but later that evening he requested the confidential succession files and wrote across the Windsor record, "Continuity requires clarity." Within 48 hours, constitutional advisors began drafting the instrument that would remove her from the monarchy's future structure. Yet when Camilla discovered that one furious sentence at Windsor had become the foundation of her removal, she refused to let the judgment stand without confronting Charles face to face. Camilla did not summon advisors, call her family, or issue instructions to the household. She carried the folded document directly to Charles and closed the library door behind her. No aides remained, no courtiers could soften the language. For the first time since the decree was signed, husband and wife stood alone with the truth between them. Camilla placed the pages on the table and asked the question Charles had feared most. Had he protected the crown? Or had he simply chosen Catherine over her? Charles had dismissed his staff hours earlier and was reading state papers inside the private library at Clarence House. The signed instrument lay open between them, its broken seal proving that the decision could no longer be hidden behind palace procedure. A royal consort is the spouse of a reigning monarch. But the position does not guarantee control after that reign ends. Camilla understood that distinction completely. The document did not remove her immediately as the king's wife, yet it declared that her authority would stop when his reign ended. She would have no guaranteed voice inside William's future household. Camilla dropped the pages onto the table and accused the monarch of allowing William and Catherine to decide how history would remember her. She demanded to know whether decades beside him could truly be erased by one confrontation at Windsor. Charles rose slowly but kept his voice controlled. He told her that the choice belonged to him alone. No advisor had forced his hand and no constitutional rule had ordered the outcome. The crown could not enter another reign carrying rival courts, competing loyalties, and an unresolved struggle over Catherine's authority. The Queen Consort stared at him differently then. She had expected him to blame officials, legal warnings, or pressure from the prince. Instead, the king accepted the full weight of the decision. That honesty struck harder than any excuse because it meant her husband had examined the cost and signed anyway. Charles then revealed, through a confidential household review, that Windsor had been the final trigger, not the only cause. The documented assessment showed staff receiving conflicting instructions, advisors competing for control, and members of Camilla's circle delaying the transfer of patronages to Catherine. Patronages are official links through which royals support charities and public organisations, and controlling them shapes both influence and public visibility. The monarch warned that allowing two households to fight over those roles would weaken William before his reign even began. Camilla asked whether Catherine had demanded her removal. Charles answered at once she had requested nothing. Through a recorded private consultation, the future queen had even urged him to avoid unnecessary humiliation and preserve Camilla's dignity. That truth denied the wounded consort the enemy she desperately wanted. Camilla slowly removed her wedding ring and placed it beside the decree. Silence stretched between them before she put it back on. Then she told Charles that if he had chosen the institution over her future, he must explain that choice to William himself. Charles had endured Camilla's anger, but the harder test awaited him in a smaller room at Windsor, where father and son would decide whether the decree represented unity or the final collapse of trust between generations. The confrontation exposed a painful truth. Camilla possessed influence, proximity, and emotional power, but the authority to shape the monarchy's future had always belonged to the sovereign. Charles could listen to his wife challenge his son or delay Catherine's rise, but only he could sign the instrument that settled the succession structure. Now he had to face William and admit why he had used that power. The conversation would reveal whether the decree had been written for the crown or for a father's guilt. Charles waited inside his private sitting room at Windsor with the signed instrument placed between two chairs. As sovereign, he controlled household appointments, transition planning, strategic councils, ceremonial precedents, and the confidential guidance prepared for the next king. Ceremonial precedence is the formal order deciding where royals stand, sit, and appear during official duties, making it a powerful sign of status. The Crown Continuity Instrument had also been designed to survive personal pressure. Copies rested with the Sovereign's private office and the Transition Secretariat, the small team preparing an orderly transfer between reigns so that no family reconciliation could quietly destroy it. The King removed his glasses, rubbed his eyes, and rehearsed his opening sentence twice before William entered. Constitutional opposition did not frighten him as much as his son's judgment. The prince sat down but ignored the document. He told his father that he had never asked for Camilla to be humiliated. He wanted certainty for Catherine, not revenge against the woman Charles loved. The monarch answered that uncertainty had become the danger. Every delay allowed rival advisors to strengthen their positions, staff loyalties to split, and Catherine's future authority to be questioned before she had even assumed it. William pressed him for the complete truth. Charles then revealed through their recorded private conversation that he had expanded Catherine's powers without consulting him. Public confidence data showed that people trusted her steadiness. Household assessments described her as the strongest bridge between tradition and younger generations. Commonwealth consultations, formal discussions with representatives from the International Association of Nations connected to the Crown, also identified her as essential to the stability of the next reign. The future king had expected protection for his wife, but not authority this broad. Charles turned to the clauses concerning Camilla. The document preserved her residence, financial security, charitable work, ceremonial respect, and personal dignity for life. She would not be publicly disgraced or erased from the history of his reign. Yet those protections were deliberately separated from institutional authority, meaning personal honour could remain while her control over appointments and strategy ended. William finally lifted the receipt, confirming that he had read the instrument. He signed it, but refused to celebrate. The prince said Catherine would carry the responsibility, not enjoy a victory, and the king accepted the rebuke without defending himself. Charles stopped his son as he reached the door. A member of Camilla's household had copied part of the decree, he warned, and palace security believed the page might already be outside royal control. William turned back, realising that the family's private conflict was about to become public judgment. The palace could manage grief behind closed doors, but once fragments of the decree escaped into the hands of the media, every private wound was about to become a national spectacle. The first leak contained only 11 words, but they were enough to shake the palace. The future queen shall assume undivided authority after the transition. Within minutes, editors demanded confirmation, royal correspondents called every contact they possessed, and staff members began searching for the missing copy. The institution that had controlled the secret for weeks suddenly lost control of the story. Upstairs, Camilla heard a television presenter speak Catherine's name and understood that her private removal was becoming public history. A national broadcaster received a photograph of one paragraph through an encrypted message designed to hide the sender's identity. The document's title had been covered, but the royal seal, Charles's handwritten initials, and the reference to the future queen made dismissal almost impossible. Buckingham Palace immediately entered crisis mode. Communications officials drafted 3 responses: deny everything, confirm only transition planning, or admit the instrument existed, while refusing to explain what it meant for Camilla. Transition planning is the private process used to prepare royal duties and authority for the next reign. But this leak showed that the process had become a battle over who would control that future. Camilla sat alone as the breaking coverage continued. When the presenter called Catherine the monarchy's undisputed future female leader, the Queen Consort reached toward the remote and stopped. She could not silence the words because part of her needed to hear how quickly the country was accepting them. Every sentence turned her private fear into public fact. The authority she had fought to secure was disappearing while millions watched, and her silence offered no defence. Catherine received the news while helping Prince Louis with schoolwork. Her phone vibrated again and again until she quietly stepped into the hallway and called William. The boy looked toward the door before returning to his work, sensing that something had changed. She told the prince that she would not allow her elevation to be presented as a victory over another woman. William agreed, but he warned that once the story reached the public, the palace could no longer control how people divided sympathy and blame. Security officers traced the photographed page to a copier used by one of Camilla's senior household aides. During a recorded internal interview, the aide insisted the copy had been made only to obtain legal advice, yet the timing told a darker story. Someone may have wanted the leak to frighten Charles into retreat before the instrument became permanent public knowledge. Charles refused to move. When officials placed a draft denial before him, the king pushed it aside and rejected a proposal to revoke the decree. He said retreat would make the future crown appear